The Blue Blood, a story by Slime Special 681, Chapter 7b. 23rd Battalion of 1st Home Army, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Verula, was an elite group of women. Though the Home Army was by far the largest standing military force fielded by any single planet in the known galaxy, it was one of the least experienced. The homeworld had remained relatively shielded over the last millennia, and as a result the Home Army had become little better than an over-equipped policing force, being primarily deployed on Chill or Heart worlds. The 23rd was unique in that it was composed of some of the only experienced, active veterans that could be found on Chill. As such, they were selected to force Russia's capitulation. The briefing had been simple. They were to land in force to the east of Moscow. Using the weight of their numbers, they should march in and dispatch any remaining resistance along the way. They were to storm the Kremlin. They would find and capture Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev. And finally, they were to force an official surrender. Simple, fast, clean. The tanks that blew away half of the battalion's exos made things less so. After a brief and bloody back and forth while waiting for orbital support, the battalion's advance continued virtually unimpeded. 15 minutes after launching, the APCs reached the Kremlin. Following a shootout with security and an unexpected greeting from a mine of some kind in the lobby, the troops had flooded in with relative ease. They even managed to capture Medvedev. Putin, however, managed to complicate things further. Apparently, there was a massive subterranean complex under the city called the Moscow Metro, boasting 287 stations, 270 miles long, and up to 240 feet deep at some points. It served to link Moscow and the neighboring cities. In short, it was probably the closest thing to the Sea of Souls on this planet. So it was that as Lieutenant Colonel Verula looked down at the exposed hatch in the escaped president's office leading to the concealed stairway, that she realized the horrifying truth. If he managed to successfully slip the communication blackout around the city, he could authorize the deployment of the Russian tribe's remaining nukes. They were going to have to go in there after Putin if they wanted any chance at all at stopping him from giving that authorization. Crack have mercy on their souls. Israel. Collot manned the turret somewhat absently as they sped down the road. She wasn't really sure if there was much of a point anymore, seeing as no one had attacked them since the radio roared into life 4 minutes ago. According to Dura, the gibberish bubbling from the radio meant that Israel had officially surrendered. Apparently, the message currently looping on all the radio stations was a ceasefire and a disarmament order. In all reality, it was quite jarring to try to comprehend. So, that's it then? We're all just supposed to be friends now? Bastrada asked incredulously, her words hanging like a dagger over the makeshift pod. They were all thinking it, but somehow saying it and giving the thought life made it so much worse. Just focus on driving. All this means is that we can make better time. They likely try to verify the orders before they decide whether or not to fire on us, Dura said, shifting uncomfortably. His skin, a ghastly pale shade of purple, contrasted only by the dark blue rings around his eyes. The only real sign of outward alertness present was his vice grip on his pistol as his head swirled listily back and forth. From an Imperial viewpoint, Dura's statement could be seen as almost nonsensical. After all, the message didn't really need verification, as the message's presence in and of itself was as much a witness to the new reality of the situation as the news it carried. Its presence meant that the Imperium had lifted the communications blockade within the country, something that was only done at the conclusion of a successful campaign. From a more humble viewpoint, however, it was still prudent to assume that the humans might believe it to be a false flag operation intended to induce a surrender. After all, prior to today, they had never been exposed to galactic military policy, let alone Imperium military policy. Silence dominated the rest of the ride as they rapidly sped towards the supposed location of the nearest regiment. With the return of communication came the disheartening news. Jerusalem had been borderline nuked off the face of the earth. The military was decimated, if not worse. The invaders had successfully established landing zones in Jaffa, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza City. Most horrifying of all, though, was the fact that Israel had surrendered unconditionally while still possessing at least 4 nuclear warheads. Just off the Mediterranean coast and below the waves, Captain Mizrahi looked at her second-in-command. If there was ever a time for insubordination, this was it. She had asked him, and the entire crew for that matter, to support her in this act of borderline treason. Borderline, only that she suspected that the surrender might have been coerced out of Netanyahu. He looked right back and nodded. She continued the countdown. 3, 2, 1, mark, and they turned their keys. The Shivanti landing zones in Jaffa, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza City erupted in nuclear fire. As another set of detonations erupted in the supposedly pacified tribes of Israel and Palestine, she realized that she would no longer be Katria again. She wouldn't even be Princess Meat Grinder anymore. No, she was Shashara. Already, her new title could be heard in hushed tones and whispers along the bridge. Shashara. At the height of her despair, and unable to continue looking at the view screen, she looked downwards. Her eyes were immediately greeted by the body of Sepera. Seized by unfathomable rage, she rose from her seat and repeatedly kicked Sepera's corpse. It was all this peasant's fault. If she had only done her duty and attacked when she was supposed. The second princess stopped mid-kick. It was Admiral Sepera's fault, wasn't it? After all, at least 9 nuclear devices had been allowed to escape the initial bombardment, and the tribes had been given time to rally a defense. Yes, and with the utter annihilation of both the Golden Glaives Company and the Second Prince, no one would question the fact that the natives had used the reprieve to their advantage. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and put a straight face in the countenance of her mother. She resumed her seat once more. Killing Sepera and Dura was the best thing she could have ever done. Thanks to their deaths, nukes or no nukes, her future was secured. Russia. Lieutenant Colonel Varula and 11 of her bravest girls had pursued the fleeing president into the Moscow metro. They charged down the stairs in hot pursuit, even leaping down one of the flights to make up for lost time. They were exhausted when they reached the doors at the bottom, but Hele had smiled on them. The door opened into a service tunnel with a 4-car train, and there, getting on board the last car, was Putin and his guards. Lacking adrenaline or the grueling endurance training of the Imperium Special Forces, only Lieutenant Colonel Varula and 3 of the others were able to reach and grab onto the 4th car as the train started to pull away. After hauling, and in one case helping themselves on board, they slowly made their way to the lead car. When they got to the 3rd car, the guards started shooting. Putin's men were equipped with AK-74Ms, firing high-caliber bullets at a rapid rate. They were more than capable of overwhelming Shivanti Flexifiber with concentrated fire at these point-blank ranges. As such, when 4 of Putin's remaining 8 guard opened up on the first woman through the 3rd car's rear door, she wasn't long for this world. Her perforated body falling back into the arms of her compatriots. Kama! She's gone. Focus on the battle. You 2 take the 2 on the right, I'll take the 2 on the left. Nikita and Maxim's head popped from unseen lasers. Alexei's right arm exploded like an egg in a microwave. Galina's knee disappeared in a chunk-filled mist, her screams echoing in the cabin. Situated in the front third car with the doors to the second car being sealed behind them, they had volunteered to stay behind as rear guards. They knew they probably wouldn't make it, but they still stayed behind and bought time for the others to set charges on the coupling between the second and third cars. "Charges set, sir," he said, handing Putin the detonator. He didn't hesitate and blew the third car free from the second. He knew what his people were dying for, and he wouldn't let it be in vain. His eyes never strained from the rear window. He could just barely make out the sights of the remnants of the third car's front door suddenly flying outwards and clattering to the ground as it faded from view. Once they had put sufficient distance between them and their pursuers, Putin started to intently monitor the bars on his phone. He only needed one to turn green, and he could begin to organize a proper counterattack. God willing, he might even be able to coordinate it with the other nuclear powers.